Welcome everyone to Incredible Display. This is a deck profile series where we highlight some of the cool decks that were a win away from a top cut record. I'm Constantine, Pringlesman123 on the Discord, and today I'm joined by Mark Ljuckanov, who built the 12th place Donatello deck at the Canada Regional, and it was piloted by his friend Devon. So usually I ask the person, why did they pick Donatello for the event? Little different here. What was it that made you want to build Donnie?
So when they were showing off all the characters during the previews, I knew I wanted a lot of turtles, if anything, for like a locals deck. I had a Ghidorah and Pony that I was tinkering more for more competitive events, and I figured, most of the turtles didn't look as competitive when you compare them to the rest of the field. And Donatello kind of looked the strongest of the four turtles to put together. So I went from there. Kind of knew that Void I was comfortable with building because I had a Void Ghidorah and an Evil Ghidorah to build. So with the Void string, kind of knew what I was getting into and just kind of toss it all together from there.
Mm-hmm. I think a lot of people can agree with that too on their judgment on which of the turtles that were really powerful. Like Donnie definitely stands out. And so speaking to that sort of power, what is the game plan for the deck list? How are you winning your games? Like, what's your strategy for that?
So there's kind of two routes that the deck can sort of take, and watching Devon play on the weekend kind of showed off some of those longer game plans. So rather than trying to poke early on, most of his turns, he kind of like built the first 2-3 turns, trying to set up a pretty solid defense, whether it was with the assets or some of just the void control pieces. And then once he kind of got to a critical mass with Donatello, right, with all the assets on board, he makes every attack really punishing. So you don't need 4, 5, 6 attacks a turn to get through some of these characters. When you're jamming in one attack with plus 5, 6, 7 damage, those hurt a lot. Mm-hmm. So with you can definitely go a longer game style, more control-esque, but then you also have the opportunity to try and race some of these low health 7-hand characters. And when you come across some of the really aggressive ones like Pony, right, it's going to be more difficult to try and last those long game rounds. So there's potential, if you're able to get out some of those asset foundations, to really punish early game. So again, when you have some of these 4 difficulty attacks that even early game can potentially get an extra 3-4 damage, that's going to hurt some of these 7-handers if they can't block several attacks in a row. So it's really interesting, depending on who you sit in front of, which sort of route you want to take.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it sounds like you really do have your options with him, and it may just be damage that he's pumping, but that's a pretty good way to kill a lot of different people, right?
Yeah, especially when, kind of like the main aggressive one that we've seen locally is just Pony, right? That low 20 health, is going to get really hurt if it gets hit by a handful of 6, 7 damage attacks. So that's kind of the neat thing about Donatello as well, is you have the option to go defensive, or you can go this really early aggressive, depending on, obviously what you see in your hand as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then so usually my next question then, and like perfect segue for it, what exactly does your defense look like? Like, how many cards do you think you'd be holding to defend with, and what tricks would you be using to sort of stave off your opponent's offense?
Yeah, so there are a couple of hand traps, especially with Donatello's built in. If he blocks with an asset, he can build it in. So something like a Donnie's Bowstaff, right, with Breaker 2 can help potentially stave something off. Blocking with a Cape of No Return to build it in, and then you have defense against another attack. Soup is a kind of neat and tricky one, just to have an extra asset. And even something like Cabal's Ruin with the speed hacks and stuff like that. Even going into like the attacks on the defense, someone will have nice defensive builds that way as well. So yeah, some of the hand traps are there, barrier shield, right? So it's that way. potentially if some of those high speed attacks you can save off that way. And then Void just generally has a lot of control pieces to potentially get you through that defensive turn.
Mm-hmm. And then perfect segue if you want to start talking about like individual cards from the actual cards that you have in front of you.
Yeah, of course. So we'll go through backups being the first one. I mean, I just run 8 Megazoids. Not just a fun card if you're going into the late game for control. And down your opponent's board is fantastic. And then when you get trickier into late games, there's potential if you're swinging back, using something like Sweeping Daggers, you can use your Mechazoid on Fallen Titans to pull it back up. So there's some neat tech that can be done with Mechazoids, but same thing, gives you that extra damage on Donatello. And then when you're going in for your turn, just commit down your opponent's foundations is fantastic.
Mm-hmm. I do want to ask with this one because obviously it counts as an asset, so we still get Donnie's boost with it. But I was curious why you chose to play Mechazoid in place of more copies of the foundations that are assets, or just more assets. Because a weakness of Mechazoid is that it can be attacked, so they can like strip away some of your damage.
Oh, exactly. So if someone's attacking my Mechazoids, I take that as a win because that's one extra attack that I don't have to deal with. My opponent wasting an attack on a Mechazoid, like I can pull back a Mechazoid with some of my attacks if I need to, but that extra vitality on Donatello is totally worth that trade-off for me. I have no problem with that, especially when I have some other like assets explicitly and foundations that count as assets instead. I think that's kind of why. I mean, there's obviously an argument to worry about like the number of Mechazoids in the deck, but it being a target of an attack, I'm totally okay with someone hitting them instead of Donatello. But that's a block I don't have to waste. Sure, they get momentum, which is, depending on the deck, definitely useful. But I'll take one less attack to my face.
I gotcha. So sort of giving them the option to mess up, I guess. You know what I mean? Like something that could be the incorrect choice for them, and they could only make it if you had it in your stage.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I do feel, again, depending on the matchup, Donatello can win those long games. So if you're giving me, potentially an extra 4 vitality, that's great. I'll take that extra that I need.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Next one, I know we were talking about it before, just the hand traps with Barrier Shield. Something sneaky like if a Falco gets in the field, those can always be really terrifying. Like Donatello only having 23 health, like if Falco's going to hit me with a 6-7 damage attack, that's going to hurt a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Or even against some of those aggressive decks to try and slow them down in the early game, like a Pony, right? If I can hopefully stave off that second, third turn, then I should be able to turn that game around really quickly. So that Barrier Shield is great early to mid game defense.
Mm-hmm.
Not too many more actions, but then into the assets. And I know this is where a lot of the Donatello decks are going to vary a lot. Even after the event, I was talking to Devon, just in terms of like what assets were more helpful for him, just depending on the field he saw, right? Because the type of decks you play locally are going to be different than what you play even in like webcam events or regionals, right? There's going to be such more of a diverse field. So the type of experience in decks I played against was a little bit different than, obviously he saw that day. I think when I was talking to him after the fact, he faced like 3 Godzilla decks. So to me, that was wild because I might locally just play against 1 or 2 over the course of a few weeks, but he dealt with 3 in one day. So, there's just going to be variance in what these assets are going to be, and that's going to be driven by, I think, meta calls and what people are used to seeing locally or anticipating in those events. So I think just starting off with some of the best ones like military airship. I think kind of like a no-brainer. That card is fantastic, whether it's used on defense to pull a card back to block, or if you need to hit again with an attack. Fantastic, useful tool. Cape of no return. It's just an incredible defense. If you can block with it and then use it to stave off another attack, that's a win-win, right? Donnie is pretty good. I mean, if you combo it with airship, you get another use out of it. Kind of avoiding that freeze factor. Cabal's Ruin. That one, you get the -1 speed and potentially, put your opponent on even more of a clock just with the charge counters. Anti-Titan Artillery, just a little bit of extra damage. A little bit of tech, and more so a little bit for the low block as well. I'm a fan of Soup. I think the card is fun. I know Devon wasn't the biggest fan of it. But there's a handful of times if you need that extra damage, right? You can play it out of your hand, get that extra +1 with Donatello, and then it has an extra +1 damage on itself. Not that you're going to use it all the time, but anything to get a little bit of damage, I think is kind of great. And then if you use it on defense, right, clears itself, you have it ready for the next turn. It was good that way. But Devon was not the biggest fan. He's like, this is the first asset I would cut. I was sad about that.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Soup. Even just saying it's fun.
Oh, 100%, right? Never going to have a bad time eating Soup.
Exactly.
Tattered Costume. I think that card is just great in this meta. You can pull it with, I think it's Tech Advantage or Collecting Scrap, one of the two. Mm-hmm. New cards trip me up a bit. I think it's Collecting Scrap. Yeah, Collecting Scrap, so you can pull it. And yeah, I think most decks that can run this card run it, so it's just a good staple for any sort of control deck. And then the last one, I know Devon wasn't happy with the number of copies that were in the deck, but Donnie's Bowstaff. I think Breaker is great for the deck. 0 difficulty assets, you can play those easily turn 1. And then, potential to pull it back in kind of like a desperation play. It has a +3 mid block, so it is a bit harder to do if you're not prepped to block for that turn. So that's just really the only thing to keep in mind with that one. But I mean, generally it's 0 difficulty assets for Donatello are great.
Mm-hmm. And to your point about the meta calls, there's a lot of one-ofs in the assets. This is some of the space where you'd be able to move things up and down, right? Like if you really want Cape of No Return, maybe you would play more of that, right?
100%. Yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, if you don't see the use for Don, or was it Dottie the Automaton, right? If you don't see the use for it, you don't like the combo with the airship or readying some of your foundation assets, it's going to be difficult to play on a 4 diff, right? So generally, it would be block and then play with Donatello. But yeah, there's a lot of play within the asset position. I think that's going to be the big differentiator between most Donatello decks. Yeah,
that makes sense. There's just so many options, and they're posed differently against different decks.
Yep, I think Void has an incredible amount of assets that are so useful. So yeah, the assets that you see from Donnie to Donnie deck are just going to vary wildly, and I think that's the interesting part of putting the deck together. Mm-hmm. I think onto everyone's favorite part, which is the attacks. So yeah, I think you're going to have a couple of mainstays with the attack strings, right? So like Sweeping Daggers, the card is just great. There's, worst case scenario, it's a 5 mid 4 +4 for 4 difficulty, right? It is never going to be a bad card with the potential to rip an attack from your opponent discard, get rid of all their Sweeping Daggers. There's a reason the card is a chase from the set, but there's just no downside to it. Great block, so yeah, 4 of those. The other best card from the set, Violent Animus Shot. There was only 2 in the deck because I only had 2. Again, depending on the meta call for this one, if we're seeing a lot more backups, which I think as TMNT enters more of the foray. A lot of people are playing, Genghis Frog, and some of the backups from the TMNT set. Plus, if you just go against any of these Attack on Titan characters that load up on backups, the card's just going to be used even more. So yeah, there's only 2. I only had 2. But depending on what you foresee the field being, I mean, you can definitely have 3 or 4 in there. I know I've seen other people just stack their sideboards with it just in case, but it's going to be another meta call in the number you have in the main deck.
Mm-hmm.
Technological advantage, 4 difficulty card draw. You're going to have an asset in your stage more often than not, just by the number of assets and the number of foundation assets. So card draw is never a bad thing.
Yeah, I was gonna. You're going to another one as well. I did really want to hear your thoughts about the TNMT attacks you put in the deck, just because it's still a relatively new set where Sweeping Daggers has been around for a couple of months, where like it's clear the power of that, but how good is this card draw attack? How good is this? I think you were going to put Collecting Scraps down as the next one.
Yeah, that's the next one. And I mean, I can put down the other team. Well, we can go through the common TMNT, common uncommon ones.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it's 2 technological advantage, 2 collecting scraps, and 4 spinning swings. 2 of those are 4 difficulty. The collecting scraps is 5. And I was talking to Devon after the fact. We wanted to just talk about just the number that's included in the deck for both of these 2, right? And it's kind of just how you're playing the deck and how you feel it out, because there's times where you just want an extra card and not necessarily an asset. But there's been times I've won off games because I played collecting the scraps, pulled soup, cleared a breaker, and now I have a soup in my stage for an extra point of damage. So, not that it's going to happen all the time, but sometimes you have those plays that just feel great as a result of it. The sort of downside to that, and Dan was kind of bringing up a good point, right? If you're going into your turn 2 and you flip a 3 trying to play that collecting scraps, the average foundations you're going to play on turn 1 is 3 or 4, right? So if you're committing out half your field to play that 1 collecting scraps because of a whiffed control check, that is really unfortunate. Whereas with technological advantage, committing 1 for that, 4/4 plus a card draw, that feels much better. So, just holistically comparing those 2, it really just depends on, pushing those differentiators. Do you want a random top deck, or do you want to try and peel something out of your discard, right? Because collecting scraps is going to hit everything except for Dottie, right? Everything's the 3 or less. Yeah, so you can even pull a cape if you really need to feel more defensive with collecting scraps. So I think as the deck is played more, and the pilot of the deck is really going to figure out what just feels better more often, because that's kind of what's going to be your driving force of deciding between those 2 cards, right? Do you want to risk the 5 difficulty to selectively choose an asset from your discard, or are you banking on that top deck?
Yeah, and you see that in the risk of the difficulty of the cards, right?
Mm-hmm, absolutely. And I mean, they're both 4 damage, so it's not like one is more punishing than the other. Obviously, collecting scraps, 6 low, if you end up playing that on, your second turn, that's going to be much harder to block. So, I mean, that's the other thing too. Like that extra speed worth that risk?
Mm-hmm.
And then the last one, Spinning Swing, it's got 4 copies. The card is fantastic late game because you're going to have, 5, 6, 7 assets. Or fake assets, right, with the Mechazoids and some of the foundation. So if you have 5 assets, it becoming a 6 mid 11 that you can play out at the end of your string, that's going to be harder for people to block out after they dealt with 2 previous attacks. And once it's mid game and you have those assets out, because everything is hurt so much because of Donatello's ability, then it's 4 difficulty, make it faster, 6 damage. It's great.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's pretty comparable to Walk the Dog stats when you say 4 diff 6 mid 11 like at the end of the show.
Yeah, and that's like, I mean, early game you're not going to hit that often, but when you get to that if you're able to survive to that, turn 3, 4, 5, all of these are going to hurt a lot. So yeah, that's why you see a lot of 4-diff attacks, just to be able to string out a little bit easier in that, mid-game range.
Yeah. Speed's definitely a huge part of it.
100%. I think one of my favorite rares from the set anyways, Shellshocked, outside of the art being hilarious on it. The card is both offensively and defensively extremely good. 5/5 or 5 with stun 2. It's going to be extremely difficult for your opponent to block, again, depending on when within the game you play it. But obviously stun is just a great ability for control. And it being 5 high, again, with the damage that Donnie's going to put on it, it's going to be punishing and help set up for the rest of your string. And then on defense too, right, if you're able to block with it, then potentially you're able to buy yourself another turn. It's similar to, Kiko's Aid, right, where next attack is +2. So, and everyone was using that card. So card is fantastic. I love it. I don't think there's any downside to playing the card.
That's awesome. Yeah, because that was another one I was gonna ask about. As like, it reads pretty good. I just haven't played with it yet, so definitely excited about that.
I really like it. It only has 3 copies. Again, same thing. I was talking to Devon. He kind of agreed the card was fantastic, but making space for a 4th copy, and as great as the card is, again, it's a 5 difficulty, right? So if you're trying to play it on your second turn to string out, and you whip that control check, it's harder to fully commit to that attack turn.
Yeah.
And then I think the last TMNT attack is Wingnut's Revenge. I was really high on this attack. I know Devon wasn't as much as I was, but a one-sided flash I don't think is ever a bad card, especially into control matchups. But I think it's really going to depend on a meta call as well, because I'm sure you could swap this out for 2 other technological advantage if you just want more card draw, right? And if you're not getting into too many control decks or decks that have a lot of enhance defensive pieces, and it's committing an asset, it's nice, but otherwise you're never going to steal anything from their stage to get the +2/+2. So argument that there's better cards instead of the Wingnuts if you're not heading into a control matchup.
Yeah, it definitely reads like a broken card, but if your opponent just doesn't use any enhances,
yeah. No, that's exactly it. Anytime I think even Devon more so, again, because he played 3 Godzilla decks, and there's not as much defense on that character, right? Mm-hmm. So it felt kind of bad when half your games are against a deck where this card's kind of mid at the end of the day.
Yeah.
So I get that argument, right? And definitely a card that you could change out of it, but I think just as we were going through the set, it felt like one of the stronger URs, so I wanted to include it because, there's nothing wrong with a one-sided flash.
Mm-hmm.
Next one is 2 copies of Ice Sword Execution. I think that the card is really strong. 5 diff, 5 high for 5, potential to do extra 5 damage with the momentum, and then committing down some of their defensive pieces. I don't think there's necessarily anything bad about the card outside of it being 5 difficulty, but no one's really going to argue the case against it being a 5.
Yeah, Ice Sword is definitely a tried and true card, I think, on each of its symbols.
Yep. Yeah, I think just similar issue with Wingnut Sabotage. If they don't really necessarily have defensive control pieces, then it might not be as strong, right? If you're only coming down 1 foundations, that doesn't necessarily do anything. That's kind of like, okay, it's it helps, but was there other cards I could have put in the deck that could have done more?
Mm-hmm.
And the last of the attacks, definitely one of the strongest ones from the Godzilla set. Try Gravity Beam. Excellent deadlock card. Being able to RFG a card from your opponent's hand, never a bad thing. And then getting, an extra +2 damage. That's great. So, Donnie playing this turn 3, healing card from their hand, you're going to have a handful of assets already on the field. This one's going to hit for a lot.
Yeah. Another classic, like, I'm not surprised to see a Death, Evil, or Void deck running this one. Like, very powerful effects on it.
It's definitely one of the, like I said, better out of those two challenger decks, and those two challenger decks were incredible already as it is. I don't think there's, like you said, any character that could run this card runs it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's generally attack strengths. Deck runs 24 attacks. It's probably a little higher, but I think that's 24 is not bad considering how the deck is after the backups and assets.
It's also 24 and 75. Yeah, on the Ultra Link. So.
Yeah, it was. I mean, it was bigger, but then trying to just cut it down once you have all the good cards, that's always a tough part.
Oh yes, 100%. Especially, it feels like on Void there's a million playables.
Absolutely, yeah, and then it's just like there's so many like potential staples that you could be running in the deck, but trying to trim it down for consistency. And I think that was kind of like main complaint after he had more play time with it, was just drawing into those cards. Like 24 is a lot, but in a 75 card deck, it might not be as consistent as you want it to be. So it's always something just to be aware of.
Mm-hmm. And then, with the foundations, is there any stuff you specifically want to talk about with it?
I can just run through them quick. I think the main ones are probably just going to be like the Ninja Turtles ones, right? Just a number of asset foundations.
Yeah, like if you'd play more of them or whatever, but it looked like there was a lot of just cards we're very used to seeing on the Void symbol. A lot of the speed hate stuff, stun hate, some card draw.
Yep. No, that's exactly it. Even just for foundations, right? Mostly just primarily just focusing on the TMNT ones, the ones that count at assets foundations. There's 4 copies of the Brotherly Love. It's a 1/6. Great if you play it early on, has a deflect if you need it. Extra supplies, there's only 3 copies there's only 2 copies. It being a 3 diff kind of is painful. And then code edits, 2 copies, it's a unique. But I think the card is fantastic, and most Void decks are going to run that card.
Yeah, sort of a Nonagon that doesn't get rid of itself, right? Like a lot of the time.
Yep, no, exactly. And then just the last, I think it's the last TMNT card, Foundation at least. But this one isn't treated as an asset, so it's just a one of, again, if cards are running extra card draw, it's nice to there. That one, there's only just one of. It's not as often that that your opponent will be drawing on their turn for you to run it, but again, it might be a meta call where maybe you might bump up the number depending on how many decks you run to that love to draw on their turn.
Yeah, and then I did want to at least ask a little bit about the sideboard. If you so I see there's 4 Dimension Spear in it, and so where exactly are you bringing that in? Like, what matchups do you want that card for?
You really need to be defensive on. Kind of like into like a Falling Titans deck, right?
Mm-hmm.
With what is it, Zeep that you run into, where he just wants to repeatedly play it, or same with Hanji, right? One of their main, or it's not going to be the main win con, but one of the main win cons is going to try and reuse that as much as possible. So trying to pull that out or eliminate that to be repeatedly hit by it makes them focus their game plan a little differently than what you wanted, what they intended to do anyways.
Yeah, so it's kind of like a single answer to their infinite loop of falling titans. Infinite loop, you know what I mean? Finite loop of falling titans.
Yeah, exactly. And same with any like echo attacks. They're not as prevalent as they might have been before, but potentially to stave off that echo, you see it from time to time and it'll pop up. So anything to deal with some of those potential recurring issues that you might fall into, it's definitely helpful. I know that, again, even Devon was saying too that he might have mainboarded some of these copies because and again, I think it's just matchup dependent where he wanted to run them more often, and he wanted to have them for defense. So I get it. It makes sense to me.
Mm-hmm. And then I noticed the 3 pass-through walls. That is another one of those cards I kind of imagine in the main deck of a Void deck, but what was some of the rationale in keeping it in the sideboard, and what would you replace it with, like in the main board?
Yeah. I mean, it's the other thing too, trying to keep the deck thin. So that's partially why it was more sideboard than anything. Depends on how many decks you run into that run assets. And I think it was more prevalent when Mimic was running around, right? There's a lot more asset usage then. But you've seen it come off a little bit. Obviously, you're going to have the cape of no return for some of those defensive decks, and tattered cloak or tattered costume too. So there's potential for use it on asset hate. But then breaker isn't used all the time, right? There's some cards that you see often which have the breaker. So because I didn't see it as often dealing with breaker and assets, I think that's always more of a sideboard card. But again, it's totally going to be dependent on what that meta looks like. If we fall into a lot more breaker blocks, depending on how the next few sets come out, then yeah, potentially there's you can use this through, I guess, only the end of the year. And then if assets become more prevalent too. The problem is that it's only a one use, right? So if they have a recurring asset, then you get your one use out of it, and that's kind of it, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then I'm assuming similarly with the other cards in the sideboard, for Ice Sword Execution and Barrier Shield, that these are also, there's some matchups where you're going to really want them, but, not always good against your opponent.
Yeah, I think Barrier Shield, again, if you're a lot of aggressive matchups that try and win, that early turn 2, turn 3, Barrier Shield is a great card, right? Fully block that attack, breaker, is kind of potentially giving you an extra turn to survive and swing back. And Ice Sword Execution, if it's more of a really heavy control deck and you need to tap down their foundations, then siding in a couple of those is going to be extremely helpful.
Yeah. And is there any specific particular attacks you'd be swapping the Ice Swords out for? Like any of the 5 diffs you wouldn't want?
If I'm going against a control deck where I'd be siding in these Ice Swords, it would most likely be a Collecting Scraps. Maybe a Shell Shocked. But it's going to be Collecting Scraps because, again, that control deck's going to want to go long. I don't necessarily need to peel into my discard as often as I need to be able to tap down their field and swing in for a turn. So I think those were probably my first 2 picks, but it's going to be kind of matchup dependent.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. And then as we're winding down the deck, do you have any other stuff you want to say about it?
Yeah, I mean, the deck is fun. I built it to be a locals deck, and it turned out to be much stronger than I anticipated, which is great. I mean, when you happen with that deck, it just makes you feel that much better about continuing to play it. But I think it might just be a step below some of the decks that are dominating the field, right? sometimes difficult to get through those Hanjis, those Zeeks. And I think Deku is just extremely powerful right now. So I don't know how confident I'd be going into those matchups to make it feel like a tier 1 deck. But it being a turtle deck that performs well and has a lot of control, and the attacks ring is super cool, makes me just want to continue to play the deck and just tinker around with it more so. And then getting, the Chrome Donatello off of, Win was like, yeah, it's the cherry on top. It's like everything is telling me that, the deck needs to continue to being played. So it's just, everything's just pointing. Deck is fun. I love Ninja Turtles. So just being able to play something that, I've grown up in my childhood that is fun to play and it actually can be feels awesome.
Yeah, that's super sick. And, I started playing Universus because I was a slave to My Hero. I really like that IP, so I totally get it. You want to play the stuff you like. That's super awesome.
Exactly. It makes it so much easier to continue playing the game because sometimes people just get pigeonholed into decks that they find online and they're meta decks and they play it because they're super oppressive and they win events or just do extremely well. I was kind of like that with Pony for a while where I played the deck because I knew it could do well in events and I just needed to tune it up. But I hated playing that deck at locals because I felt so bad for anyone playing against it. Whereas, with Donatello, there's at least a little bit of back and forth that you can have fun with the deck. And I think, at the end of the day, we're playing a game to have fun, competitive events aside. But that's why we play the game, right? It's to have fun and
absolutely.
You can win it better.
Yeah, that's awesome. And winding down even further, do you have any specific shout outs you want to give any people, any stores, communities, anything?
Yeah, Devon, he piloted the deck fantastically. I know he hasn't played in a few years, so for him to do that well with a deck I wasn't even 100% confident that could, even get top 16, he did great. My locals community at Critical Hit Gaming, they're fantastic local. Handful of the players, Matt, Cause, Alistair, Brad, and then some of my friends Danny and Mike that have been playing the game for ever since the Sabretooth games era. So like
so they've been around.
50.
Yeah.
I'm aging myself now. And then I think even JJ too, he comes out from time to time. But we got a good crew. We're trying to get more people playing the game because at least at a locals level, it's fun. I know people have their issue with the game, but I'm still having a blast with it. I wish TMNT was a bit stronger, but it's still really cool.
Yeah, it's awesome. And I always have my shout out at the end. I want to shout out the Universus or the UVS Ultra account, Metaversus, which I'm going to link in the description. It has this Donnie deck all spread out. It shows every match that Devon played against. It shows what his opponent's decks were. So it's really awesome if there's any data you want to see about the events, and I highly recommend checking it out. Other than that, everyone watching, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and have a good day.